You're listening to The Donor Doctor Show, where your host, James Newberry, will help you improve the health of your fundraising. Now over to James.
Hello, this is The Donor Doctor again, and in our last podcast, we talked about David Ogilvy, the father of modern advertising. And I went over his career. I went through his letter for the United Negro College Fund in 1968. Now, I have here with my son. Do you know what happened in 1968 in the United States?
Probably a lot of riots.
Riots. There was the Chicago Riots. The Democratic Party. I have an aunt who was a Humphrey delegate in that. There was RFK had been assassinated, Martin Luther King. So there were racial riots. There was a lot of commotion. And that is probably why his letter was so successful, because the timing was great. And that's probably the most important thing, whether you're success of a fundraising cause, is if it's at the right time. I made some critiques of his letter, which can be found online. I won't read it again. One of the criticisms I probably should have made more was that it lacked storytelling. It was concentrated on statistics more than storytelling. It should have had an example of a young black kid who was helped by UNCF, and it was transformational. He came from the projects and was very successful. That would have probably been better. Stories are not just for direct mail. You remember we went to the Youth for Tomorrow banquet some years ago. Terry Bradshaw was the main speaker, and he passed on stories. That's what the speech was. The most powerful speech, though, was a teenage black girl who talked about her life, drug addiction, and the transformation she made at Youth for Tomorrow. So all sorts of, it doesn't really matter the medium, stories are very powerful. Now, I have a theory of why there are more Baptists than Episcopalians in the United States. I mean, obviously the Baptists are more evangelical, but I think it's the testimonies that you find in like a Baptist church are very powerful. People are moved by it. The idea of transforming your life is something that appeals to a lot of people. Perhaps I'm wrong, but it's just a theory. Anyway, one of the most powerful words in fundraising, we say, is you. You should have more yous than I's. Now, Richard Armstrong, who wrote 40 Years of Junk Mail, he says something kind of interesting. He says we don't use I enough, and he means I in the sense of stories, where you share your stories. Now, there's a couple letters that I've gotten recently that I think have some excellent stories. One is by a Covenant House, which is they provide shelter for homeless kids, kids down on their luck, sex trade, that kind of thing. And this one has been used in a number of appeals. I'm a lapsed donor, so I know about Covenant House, and I also went to a lecture, so that I do know this is a very strong letter. Here's the letter. She came to our front door on a Tuesday morning dressed in dirty rags, holding a little aluminum paint can in her arms. From the second she stepped inside our shelter, she mystified us. Whatever she did, wherever she went, the paint can never leave her hands. When Kathy sat in the crisis shelter, the can sat in her arms. She took the can with her to the cafeteria in the morning she ate, and to bed with her that first night she slept. When she stepped into the shower, the can was only a few feet away. When the tiny homeless girl dressed, the can rested alongside her feet. "I'm sorry this is mine," she told our counselors whenever we asked her about it. "This can belongs to me." "Do you want to tell me what it is, Kathy?" I asked her. "Not today." Well, anyway, what it turned out, it was the remains of her mother. So it was a very powerful story. I thought that was it's worked for years. So anyway, another one that I thought that might interest you, because you majored in Middle Eastern studies, is by this Michael Evans. Had you ever heard of Michael Evans before today?
No.
He is an Assemblies of God pastor, and he, I think at one time, had one of these, what I think they call them Messianic Jews, where they try to get Jews to convert to Christianity in the United States.
I've heard of that,
okay, yeah. Anyway, this talks about a story of, though, when he went to Israel. And it's his story. It was more than 30 years ago when I made my first trip to Israel in obedience to command from God that I did not understand. The only thing I knew for sure that I was about to go to Israel and meet with Prime Minister Menachem Begin. But I didn't know why. In the natural, there was no reason to make the trip. There was no reason to think that the leader of the Jewish state was going to meet with an unknown minister of the gospel. I had no expectations of success, but I did what God said. Through the direct intervention of God, I met with Mr. Begin's senior advisor, Reuven Hecht. I was tired and jet lagged and by mistake called him Jacob, even though I knew his name was Reuven. He was shocked and told me that his father called him Jacob when he blessed him on his deathbed. It was no accident. It was God putting things into motion to change the future of nations. Reuven Hecht arranged for me to meet with Prime Minister Begin. The problem was I still didn't know what I was supposed to say to him. I'm going to skip then. Then he said, so he has his meeting with Begin. Then he takes his taxi to the Netanyahu home and knocked on the door. Ben Zion Netanyahu opened the door and invited me in. I told him that I had come to express my condolences on the death of his son. Benjamin Netanyahu walked into the room while we were talking, and I could immediately tell that his heart was broken. This anniversary of the day he lost his big brother and hero was taking a toll on him. I asked him if I could pray for him, and he said yes, and I prayed the Spirit of the Lord directed my words. I told him that a young man who wasn't involved in politics at all at the time, that God would bring beauty from the ashes of his despair. I anointed him with oil and prophesied that he would one day be the Prime Minister of Israel. Well, you laugh, but some people take this seriously. When I left their home, that day, it turns out he was right. Yes, if you believe the story. When I left their home that day, God told me that He had in mind for me to do. I called Reuven Hecht and asked for another meeting with Menachem Begin. I went back to his office and told him that I met with the Prime Minister of Israel the day before. He said, "No, you were mistaken. You didn't meet with me yesterday." I said, "Not you, the future Prime Minister of Israel." I told him Benjamin Netanyahu had encouraged me to find a place for this young man in his administration. Reuven Hecht met with Benjamin that night and offered him the first government job. None of this would have happened if I had not been obedient to God, even when it didn't make any sense in the natural. The next day, when I prophesied over Benjamin Netanyahu, I told him that he would serve as Israel's prime minister twice, and the second time would be during the most difficult and dangerous days in Israel's modern history. Now, you can be skeptical if you like, but it is an interesting story. Mm-hmm. And that's my point. And it also, what I like about this story, it fits into the urgency and need today. So it's not enough to tell a story. You need to tell a story that fits in, that has relevance.
Yeah.
You can see the relevance of it. He met with Begin. I don't know to the degree this is true, but I do know that he met with Begin and Netanyahu. I do find that believable because he has pictures and endorsements and things like that. One of the things that was impressive about this package is that he has very kind words that Netanyahu says about him. Olmert, isn't it Olmert in jail now?
I think he had,
yeah. Olmert,
Yeah,
Danny, I think he's the ambassador of Israel. I don't know how to pronounce that. George Bush, and Bill Bright, who's the director of Campus Creed for Christ, passed on.
Yeah, Israeli politics has a lot of people who've been in jail, to be honest.
Well, in some ways that's good. It shows that people who are corrupt are being held accountable.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily a bad thing.
I think they have a former president and a former prime minister in jail.
Sure. Anyway, I find it an interesting story, and that's why I shared it. I think too, and I know it's been a successful letter because I've asked some list people. I actually got this sample from my dad's house. It was in the recycling bin. And I said, and it's mailed in a 9x12. The top of the carrier: Israel is in the crosshairs of a deadly attack. Will you help defend God's chosen people today?
It's very provocative.
Yeah. On the back, it has Israel with Iran, Iraq, Syria, and even Egypt with weapons, I guess missiles.
Surface-to-air missiles.
Yeah, launched at them. Anyway, a good story,
Yeah.
Perhaps incredible for some people that he prophesied this, but I think to the market, they would believe this.
Yeah.
Because he has some credibility here with these kind words that these people said about him, a good story, a lot of information here too, including a folding map. It gives the appearance that this is a really well thought out, a serious issue.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely an above average mailing. The flaw of this mailing and the Covenant House mailing is, the first is the salutation of dear friend, which I agree with Herschel Gordon Lewis that dear friend means dear stranger these days. It's so used.
Mm-hmm.
Why couldn't you say dear concerned Christian leader, something of this sort? Also, there's no flattery. Why? There's no you. Although it should be more I because it's a story. Couldn't you say, like you, I share your concern about the state of Israel, that kind of thing. There's almost none of that. So it's all about I, this guy, Evans. So that would be my criticism. Now, I got another letter in the mail from my colleague who wrote it, and this mailing didn't work. And I liked the story, but it didn't work, and I'll tell you why at the end. And I'll write, since you've been a friend of Peaceful Valley since February of this year, I want to tell you about my best friend, partner, my wife, Amy. For 24 years, Amy and I have raised kids and built our rescue together. And all those years, we've lived by the belief that the secret to a happy life is putting the other person first. When I had my tractor accident, Amy stayed at my side the entire week I was in the hospital throughout my long recovery, and even now, joining me on most of our rescue trips. I can honestly say I would not be the man I am today without Amy. Then I'll skip. Then it tells a story about his wife, Amy, and how she saw a donkey was having problems giving birth and how she saved that. And it's a pretty good story. The reason this was an unsuccessful mailing, in my opinion, is for this donkey rescue, the focus must always be on the donkeys. It included a photo of his wife with the foal. I think that was a mistake. It was different than most of the mailings, which had always kept the focus on donkeys. So when I got the sample, I was curious to how it did, because it had a pretty good story, but it's not the right story to get donations. And I wanted to contrast this with a mailing that I did for the WASP Museum. We had a signer. The WASP were the women Air Force service pilots of World War II, fly girls, also called. Dear James, you and I have never met, but my mother wrote to you several times to share her experiences as a woman pilot in World War II. I know she deeply appreciated your support of her favorite cause, the National WASP World War II Museum. Sadly, my mom, Mary Alice Vandeventer, passed away at the age of 90 on January 28th. As the proud daughter of a WASP, I want to personally thank you for your support of the greatest generation's forgotten Air Force. Because of your generosity, the museum has made great strides in honoring women like my mom. And I'm going to skip. As you remember, it was Mary's dream to attend the grand opening of the museum expansion next year. Unfortunately, she didn't live long enough to see her dream become a reality. But with your continued support, future generations will learn the sacrifices, ... Now here's more about her story. Like other women pilots of her generation, Mary was prevented from being a commercial airline pilot after the war. She was asked to be a stewardess. Mother candidly declined the offer, saying, "There's no way in hell I'm going to be a waitress or on a glorified flying bus." Instead, she chose to be an airline reservationist in Dallas before eventually becoming a teacher, school board member, and a historian in her hometown. Skip. God bless you for helping to share the legacy of women like my mom. Your continued financial support, and then the P.S. I talk about the obituary, which told her story as well. Mm-hmm. So here, if you notice the difference, it's not that my letter is better written, but it's more on target. The woman who had died had signed many of the letters, So they had a relationship with her.
That's a more touching story.
It's a touching story. Although the other one was touching too. She helped him when he had his tractor accident. But
There's
this one worked
deeply personal about that.
Yes.
And it directly had to do with the museum.
And it directly had to do with the museum, exactly. And I think that was so powerful. And stories are great for, they're very personal. There was another letter, and this isn't a long story, but this is the kind of personal stuff that you had in the Vandeventer letter that I like to share that I think helps mailings. Dear Jonathan, like life, our rescue work is heartwarming and heartbreaking. Just 2 years ago, my mother died the day before Thanksgiving. My older sister died the day after, unrelated causes. The holidays are a bittersweet time for our family. The same truth holds true for America's horses, especially the wild one. Horses are herd animals with strong bonds. Brutal roundups separate family bands, stallions, mares, and foals, forever torn apart. The news is often a hard blow to take, and then we gave a number of scandals and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But that's an example of taking advantage of the holidays. There's a lot of people who feel saddened at the holidays, and sharing a little personal story. This mailing did exceptionally well. Do I know it's because of that particular line? I don't know, but it is a line that you kind of have to read on when somebody's mother and sister died within 2 days of each other. It's a tough thing. Mm-hmm. So that's an example of what I'm talking about. You don't have to have necessarily a long story. Even a short story that transitions to your cause. You're trying to compares the two. Now it's interesting. A lot of people are not into stories. Some people disdain stories. One of the letters that I was asked to review, a friend of mine didn't like. It was for Hillary Clinton. And my objection to it, first it was in a window number 10, so it had a corporate look. It had her logo and everything like that. And I thought would have been more effective if it had told more of a personal story. It can, it was a very hostile, kind of critical of Republicans, mm-hmm. and that's nothing wrong with that as an ingredient of the package. But there was no flattery. There was no thank you for being a progressive leader, that kind of thing. Dear friend, it was another dear friend letter, which I think is a terrible salutation. And not that it matters that much, but it gets you off in the wrong direction in that you don't really engage with the prospective donor. That's the problem. And what I would have done would have a letter by Chelsea, maybe a photo of Hillary and her mother, talking about how Hillary's mom's generation didn't have the opportunity to go to college maybe or work or that kind of same that it would have been a huge thing for a woman to be elected. Would have been beyond the comprehension. Almost as radical as a black president to have a woman president back then. So I thought that they missed some opportunities to make it personal. It's very corporate, very impersonal, just attack the opposition, but nothing like, oh, I really need you. You're a key member of our family or supporter. Many other political mailings do this. For instance, the Obama and Romney campaigns both sent me photos, with my name personalized as an example of the kind of engagement. I'll never forget my colleague Wendy's mother getting letters from Bill Clinton and taking it very serious, believing like it was really just writing her. So you want people to believe the illusion that you're just writing them. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to dispense that by, sometimes even just having a window kind of undercuts that. But certainly the way the letter was, it was not unique at all. It was a typical fundraising letter, below average in my opinion, in that it did not have that kind of engaging rhetoric, just very hostile. Something. It didn't flatter the donor. I think this was a big mistake. That's not alone though. I was at a conference, I guess last year, and I brought up the question, and I said, "Do you believe in? Do you use any storytelling?" It was the ACLU and the Planned Parenthood were giving this conference, and I was impressed by the statistical modeling and all this kind of stuff they did. And they also were very good at upgrading their donors. Having they had various clubs, and they explained all that. And it was kind of interesting how they did that. Well, the ACLU person said, well, we he didn't say it this way, but it indicated they were above storytelling. Okay, they were above that. Like, their people wouldn't get storytelling. When in fact,
really an organization that could use.
Of course, there's lots of stories in they're defending people who've been stopped, harassed by cops or whatever.
That seems honestly like the only way they could ever.
Well, that was his thing. I think, of course, the ACLU. I'm not impressed by their. I used for years as an example of bad teaser copy. I used theirs. They had as teaser copy. There's a movement afoot to defend liberty. When it was about Dick Cheney had the ability to eavesdrop and stuff. This was before Snowden. It was years ago, obviously. So anyway, he was at least respectful. The Planned Parenthood woman rolled her eyes at me and said, well, we can't expect a woman who had an abortion to share her story. Which, I'm not sure that's the case. I think there are some that would. There's certainly you could pick the spouse of a doctor there who'd been threatened. You could pick all sorts of things. And the irony is, and I picked up their newsletter, and it had a great story of some 101-year-old lady in Brooklyn talking about how bad it was in the day, and how she went to the market, sang her click. She was she wrote a handwritten note, and they did they facsimile of it. She would have been a perfect signer. So right there in their own newsletter, they had stories, but for some reason think they're too good for stories. Well, don't think you're too good for stories. Stories work for all people, men, women, right-wingers, left-wingers, Christians, Jews. It doesn't matter. People like stories, and it's a great way to transmit your message. So engage in stories, flatter your donor. That's my lesson today. Well, thank you, Jonathan, for coming here today. Hey, this is the Donor Doctor. If you'd like to text me, if you have comments or questions, my number is 240-477-3999. Thank you. Signing out.